And so we've asked Frances Stetler to come for this day, this special day, and that we can learn from her. And so that we have 3 different sessions where she will be sharing. And so this morning, this is a combined adult class, and others will be gathering in as time moves along. And then at 5:15, we have a special session where she's going to be talking about learning disabilities, and that will be happening over at the parsonage. And so if you have a child or a grandchild or students that you work with, that you wonder if they have a learning disability, Frances, Sister Stetler, has done her doctoral dissertation in some of these fields. And so she has a lot of wisdom to share that we can learn from, and so we're looking forward to that session at 5:15. And then in the evening service tonight at 6 o'clock, she's just going to be sharing from her heart. And so I've just kind of allowed her to go whatever direction she'd like to go with that. But for this morning's session, 9:45, I've asked her to just talk about the power of influence. And so we all know that it is influence. We all have an influence. And so she is going to share about the power of influence in this session today. So I just trust that you will just open your hearts and open your minds to allow God to speak to us through her ministry today. And so let's bow our heads as we begin and ask the Lord to help us. Father, we bow in your presence today. We thank you for the opportunity that is ours to gather together, and we thank you for the opportunity to learn and to grow. And so we thank you for Sister Frances Stetler's willingness to come and share in these sessions today. I pray that you would use her to speak to our hearts, that you would give us ears to listen, hearts that are open to the control of your Spirit. And so, Lord, we're asking you that you would do that for each and every heart that is here today. Accomplish your plan throughout this day. Would you receive the glory and honor for all that's accomplished, and will not fail to praise you. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, Sister Frances, appreciate you being here. Thank you so much.
All right, so I thought it's almost funny because you all have never seen me here, okay? I've been telling stories and all kinds of things when I came here, but this is actually, I tell people that it took the Lord almost 30 years to get me so I could talk to adults all the time. Because my first calling was to children because I felt very uncomfortable. I tell people I'm socially retarded, but not quite. I'm very backward and introverted, and so it's hard for me in social settings. And I was struggling with that as a teen, and the Lord said to me, so where do you feel comfortable? And that was the easiest question I'd ever answered, and that was with children. So the Lord said, that's the direction I want you to pursue. So I did. I taught children in school, vacation Bible schools and junior church and all of that. And then after I moved to Pennsylvania, one day the Lord said to me, they're going to ask you to teach adult Sunday school class. I'm like, what? They're going to ask you to, and it takes the Lord, I'm a little thick-headed. I'm not the only Stetler like that, but I am one of them. So it took the Lord a while for me to understand that that's actually what was going to happen. And so then the next Sunday they elected me as one of the Sunday school teachers. So I was teaching last Sunday, and I said, I'm going to have a vacation Bible school this week. I'm not sure what kind of idiot signs up for 3 speaking times on the day before vacation Bible school. And some of you met maybe Brad and Karen this week. Karen's dad nodded at me kind of knowingly, and he said, a brother. I said, oh no, it's not a brother, it's a nephew, and he's worse. So let's talk about influence. I guess the first thing that we need to establish is, what is influence? the impact you have on someone else around you. Anybody else want to contribute there? Okay, yes, the pattern. They see it as a pattern. And even if they don't necessarily want to follow, they often do, the person that they respect. So, yeah. Yeah. Well, the thing that I want to say to you is everybody has an influence. So it's not whether you're going to influence, but it's how you're going to influence. And nobody gets by without that. Not whether you're going to, but how. You know, and sometimes I see people that want to, and I felt this way too. I don't want anybody to follow me. What if I make a mistake and they go wrong? Well, I really don't. I have the choice as to whether I make a mistake, but I don't have the choice as to whether they follow me. Because the Bible tells it very plainly, Romans 14:7, for none of us lives to himself, and no man dies to himself. So we're going to impact, we're going to influence the people we know, the people who are the closest to us, but we also impact people when we walk into a store. Sometimes we forget that. I often pray for myself and with my students, Lord, help us to represent you well today. Because whether we say anything with our mouth or not, we used to sing a song when I was a kid. It's what you are, maybe some of you remember this, what you are speaks so loud that the world can't hear what you say. They're looking at your walk. They're listening to your talk. They're judging by your actions every day. What you are shouts. I have a song that is all ready to use, and I haven't just felt clear to do it, but a bunch of years ago, the Mark Trammell Quartet sang, your walk talks, and your talk talks, and your walk talks louder than your talk talks. I just thought that'd be fun for kids to sing, but you have to kind of bounce with it a little bit to get all that syncopation in there. But it's true. We are impacting and influencing people every time we meet someone. My mother was some of you know that part of my mother, but she was very down to earth and just, she just said it like it was. She didn't pretty it up most of the time. And she used to tell us, if you don't like getting along with people, you're going to have to go out on an island all by yourself. Because if you're with people, you're going to have to come under authority. That was usually the point she was making right then. You're going to have to come under authority, and you're going to influence people. So the point we want to make today is, how do we do it the right way? So the Bible gives us some patterns. And some of them we'll look at, and some of them I'll tell you about. I get to tell a Bible story, see? The first one I want to talk about is Samuel's mother. In 1 Samuel chapter 1, we meet Hannah, and I've always loved Hannah. I've always felt sorry for her. But she was resilient, wasn't she? And she just kept her eyes on the goal, and she served God. And so she prayed for a son. You know that story. She prayed for a son. She prayed earnestly for a son. And she made a promise. Who can tell me what that promise was? You give me a son, I'll give him back to you. To serve before you all the days of his life. Well, then we move into the next chapters, and she's going to take him to Eli at the tabernacle. Eli was the high priest. But Eli had a major problem. Eli's problem was he didn't make his children mind. And so here they were serving, if you please, They weren't doing much serving, but serving in the tabernacle, and just, they were vile. They weren't just bad, they were vile. I wouldn't stand up here this morning and tell you what they did. It's that bad. And that's the man that's going to raise her son? That's chilling, isn't it? Did she know that? It seems to indicate that people around knew it. I don't know if she was far enough away she didn't know it, but she'd made a promise. So the Bible uses the term when he was weaned, which, isn't the way we do in America probably, but he was a young man, a very young child actually. And she took him to present him to the Lord. And I love this. I always try to listen to the Bible that I'm going to talk about just before I present. And I was listening to it this morning. And she said, it just rings in my ears, "For this child I prayed, and God answered. And I'm keeping my promise. Here he is." Well, then we come to chapter 3. And in chapter 3, you know that story too. You know that God called Samuel. We don't know how old Samuel was, but he wasn't a little child anymore. He was a child, but not a little child, because he had, I think, 4 siblings by this time. So he wasn't 5, unless they had 1 a year, which I guess that's possible, but yeah. Anyway, so he's here at the temple. He's got siblings back home, and he's there before the Lord, and God calls him. Now notice that Eli is so disconnected to God that Eli doesn't even recognize that it might be God talking to him. Maybe he didn't recognize it as the voice of God. Maybe he thought Samuel was too little to hear and too little for God to give his attention. They're younger guys in here. Just don't, Paul says that don't let any man despise thy youth, but be thou an example and influence. So there he is. God's calling him. He wakes up, and his instant response was to go check the person of authority. Who do you think taught him that? Probably not Eli. He wasn't making his family obey at all. His mother. When you read, I wasn't really waiting for that. I was just wanting it to soak in your mind. Yes, his mother must have taken that as a call. We get that feeling as a calling from heaven. And she trained him, because when you read the first part of 1 Samuel 3, you find out that the light was going out. That probably meant that they didn't take care of the lamps and things in the temple as well. But I think it's symbolic too. Because when you come to the end of 1 Samuel 3, you find that the people recognized him as a person that was going to take the lead in serving God. And the word of the Lord came back to Israel. But that early training, he wasn't, we also know Eli hadn't changed his ways. Because if you listen to the message, which is just chilling, the message that God gave Samuel when he finally understood it was God, God said, I'm not going to forget, there's never going to be an old man in Eli's house, and I'm not going to forgive their sins even with sacrifices. So the influence, the good influence, reached back to his mother. Moses. Again, you know this story very well. Moses was fetched out of the water. It's a good southern term. He was pulled out of the water by the princess. But his mother was determined to save this boy. Again, it just jumped off the page to me this morning. She saw that he was a proper child. She recognized that God had something special for him. So she took extreme measures to protect this boy from Pharaoh. And now here he is floating in the Nile River. He's supposed to be in the Nile River, but he's floating in the Nile River in this intricate basket his mother has woven for him, covered inside and out so that it won't leak. And I can't even imagine this. She puts her youngest son in that and floats him on the Nile River and sets his older sister to watch. This woman had extreme faith. The princess draws him out, names him Moses because she drew him out of the water. And at the proper time, we don't even know the time here either. But I'm quite sure Pharaoh's house wouldn't have let Moses be educated in a Hebrew house. Yes, his mother was nursing him and taking care of him, but they're not going to let him be educated there. So think about this. I don't know how old he was, but he was young. When he left all the teachings of God and God's law and what God required of us, and he went to a godless palace. But Hebrews picks this up. If you have your Bible, look at it with me. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 24. That's the worst thing about scrolling on your phone. You've got to scroll for all the pages. Notice the wording here. By faith, Moses, when he was come to years. There's a lot of time between his mother's house and now, right? Refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. What? The best clothes, the best house, the best education, all the right people, all the right influence, but look at it. Choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. How did he understand the difference there? He didn't get it from Pharaoh's household. Esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he had respect under the recompense of the reward. Somehow in those early days, his mama had taught him, you got to make a choice, Moses. And she'd given him enough information that he understood how to make that choice. Talk about influence. We can look at Timothy. Paul was talking to Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 5. He says, when I call to remembrance the unfeigned faith that is in thee, which dwelt first in thy grandmother Lois. I put this in my notes because I can't ever remember whether Lois was the grandmother or the mother, so I put it in my notes. Thy grandmother Lois and thy mother Eunice, and I am persuaded that is in thee also. His dad was a Greek, probably not a believer, but these women taught him till he became the follower of Paul, the follower of Christ first, and then he picked up the mantle of Paul. When I moved, actually I hadn't moved there, didn't even know I was going to move to Pennsylvania yet, and I was a children's worker at the camp meeting. And I told you I'm shy in social settings. You know, my tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth, and I tell my students, if I don't talk to you in the hall, it's because I can't think of one word to say. My tongue is stuck to the roof of my mouth. So I don't just, you know, I talk to the person in the grocery store a lot more than I would talk to, sorry, you. if I just went out in the congregation. I'd say hi and move on because I can't think of anything to say besides hi. That's a pretty simple one. I kind of remember that now. Anyway, I was having a low sugar attack, and I was in the dining hall, and the back door opened, and here came this woman hobbling on a cane. And she started talking to me from way back there. And she talked all the way up to me. I never met a woman like her ever in my life, and that's the truth. She'd only been saved just a few months, and the Lord had transformed her life. Oh, you go with her. She had esophageal cancer and adrenal cancer and 2 or 3 others, and she should have been dead a long time before she did die, but the Lord preserved her because she was simply influencing every person she met. You went with her to the grocery store, people would stop her in the aisle, never saw her before. Stop her in the aisle and ask her to pray for them. She just radiated. If you went with her to the hospital, I think that's why the Lord, that's just my opinion, I think that's why the Lord let her live so long. Because she talked to all these doctors, and she'd go to the doctor and they'd say, "Do you smoke?" "No." "Have you ever smoked?" "Yes." She smoked 4 packs a day, and she told me one time, she said, back in those days, Pennsylvania didn't let you buy cigarettes on Sunday, so I'd have to go to the corner store and buy twice as much on Saturday, so I had my 4 packs for Sunday. She was terribly addicted. She would drink alcohol by the case. She told me that. And that's how some of her family tried to get her to go back after she'd given her heart. She'd bring her favorite alcohol and sit it right beside her. So she'd go to the doctor. She said, "Do you know approximately what time you quit smoking?" And her face would light up like a candle. "Oh, yeah," she said. April the 2nd, 2002. And they'd always be surprised that she was so specific. "What do you mean?" So she'd tell them, "God delivered me." "Do you drink?" "No." "Did you ever drink?" "Yes." And she'd go, so she was able to tell everybody she met. I never met anybody like her. She used to say to me, "Oh, Frances, I wish I knew the Bible like you." I'm like, "Okay, I've read the Bible through every year since I was 12. I'm going to know more than you about it, just because I've read it more than you." Now, you have to understand, she was only saved for that length of time. She died in, I forget, she only lived about 6 years after she got saved. But by that time, she'd read her Bible through many times. And, but she just had this, she used to say she wished she knew as much as I did. I was like, I wish I had the presence that would walk into a room and people would come to me and ask me to pray for them. There were people that came from the grocery store, never met her before. She always had her door unlocked. I'm like, okay. A murderer could come in there. Oh, well, she wasn't worried about it. She would give them her address, and they would come to her house so she could pray with them. A lot of you have heard this story, but I just, when I talk about influence, influence is not just right now. Yes, it can be memorable right now, but influence is something that, by its very nature, influence reaches out and spreads out. Mrs. Taylor. I want to tell you just briefly about Mrs. Taylor. She was in 3rd grade with my grandpa Lamb. And his dad had passed away, and they were just terribly poor. He would have to go, he was the first boy, so sometimes he had to wear hand-me-down girls' shoes to school, so the kids would make fun of him. Or he might have to come barefooted. And everyone in his third grade, mind you, everyone in his 3rd grade class made fun of him, except for one little girl. And I never can remember her name, her first name, because I knew her as Mrs. Taylor many years later. But anyway, she was kind to him. And then fast forward, that was about 1896, as close as we can figure it out. Fast forward. Now, both of them have grown, and they're both married, and my mother is number 8 of 12, and she's 12 and a half years old. So there have been a lot of years in there. And one day, that woman and her husband came to my mom's home, knocked on the door, and invited them to church. My grandpa didn't go to church, and he wouldn't let the children go to church. He invited them to church, and this is what Grandpa Lamb said. He said, "I'll go one time because she was kind to me." That influence reached from a small girl. A lot of times we overlook them when we think about powerful influence. Clear down through the years to have him say, "I'll go one time." And that's the Sunday, that's the service my mother gave her heart to Jesus. And then that same influence that started all those years ago, I'm here because of that. It changed the trajectory of my mother's life. And she made that choice to serve Jesus when she was 12 and a half. A lot of you were at her funeral right here. 83 years old, and never changed that, and impacted my life to the point that I wanted to serve Jesus. Influence. So, that impacts me and always grabs me. But I want to also tell you about my mother's influence was so strong that my sister and I sometimes laugh. We serve supper and we say, "Mother would like it, Mother wouldn't." She went to, she had proper training about colors and appetite and serving the table, and we don't really care as long as we have food ready to eat. But if it's a really nice, balanced look and served well, we'll say, "Oh, Mother would like this." And you know that my mother had dementia, horrible, just a living death those last years of her life. And sometimes she was mean, and sometimes she screamed. And she was never mean, and she never screamed when we were growing up, never. But that disease made her, and we were kind of afraid after she died, maybe we would remember her that way. But instead, her influence was so strong that what we remember is the influence that led us to Jesus, and the funny. My mother was extremely funny. And so she had lots of little sayings. Perhaps I'll share those with you, maybe not till tonight. But she babysat for a lot of years before they retired and moved to Rising Sun, Indiana, and she used that money to, help buy the retirement house. And so she's babysitting for big shot people in Cincinnati. And, one of them is one of the founders of Subway. It's on their corporate board. Another was the head of the biology department at the University of Cincinnati. And they'd bring their children to our house. And so my mother said, I told those parents I'm not going to teach their children about religion. And I'm in my teens, and I'm like, "Mother, they're coming to your house. They can see by looking at you, you're different." She said, "No. Teaching children about religion is the parents' responsibility." And I was just completely, but I quit complaining. You know why? Because every single parent, before their child was old enough, she only babysat the little ones till they went to preschool, and every single one of those children, their parents stayed afterward one day and said, "I want you to tell me what's different about you." She testified to every single one of them. Besides that, though she didn't say anything, those children wanted to be like Julie. That's my dad called her Julie. Her name was Jewel, but so the babysitting kids called her Julie. Every one of them wanted to be like Julie. They wanted to dress like Julie. They wanted their hair like Julie. And I saw one of them. We had Sarah from 30 days. She was 30 days old. Up until maybe 2.5, it might have been 3. Her mom was the head of the biological department at the University of Cincinnati. And the dad was a big-time surgeon or something in the Cincinnati area. And the home had split up while she was pregnant, and he didn't come to the hospital, and the woman was a bitter woman. Oh, come to find out, she had refused to marry. She was engaged to, but refused to marry a guy that had made a decision to follow the Lord and had felt called to ministry. So there was all kinds of things tied into there. But I saw Sarah when she was about 13. I was actually working for Salvation Army at the time, and so I couldn't go talk to her, but we recognized each other. And she was dressed like Julie. I just can't tell you enough. You know, sometimes I'm sure some of you with young children will think that I'm just going to be here forever, just treading the same thing. But every day of your life, you're making an impact. Every one of you teachers, whether it's a Sunday school teacher or whether it's a school teacher, you have an influence. First time I realized, and this was a shock to me because I started teaching I was just barely 21. Not something I'd recommend for other things, other people, but that's the way the Lord led me. But anyway, I was very young, and I still felt like I was a young person. In fact, the first time I went to church, to the young people's meeting, they said, "Oh, you're not supposed to be here. You need to be down the hall in the prayer room." And I'm like, so how did I go from young person to not even being able to go? They only did it through 17, so I was really old to them. Anyway, but I realized one day that my students were being impacted by me, and it shook me to my core, and it should have. If you know much about the Stetlers, you know that most of them are not far from chapstick. My service doesn't go well if I don't have chapstick. But anyway, I used a particular kind at the time. And there was only one place in that state, at least that area, that I could get that kind of chapstick. And that was back in the, and they kind of come back a little bit, but the gathery sleeves, you know, today they have elastic. Then we put cuffs on them, so they were puffy. So I would tuck because I didn't always have pockets, I would tuck my chapstick up in my sleeve, and that's how I carried it. So when I needed it, I have to kind of stick my finger up there and get it and use it and stick back up there. Special kind, remember? And I looked up one day in my class, and I had 2 girls walking down this aisle. And they reached into their sleeve, and they pulled out the same kind of chapstick. Now that's funny. It's funny to me too, but as a young person, I was like, everything I'm doing, they're noticing. People don't tell you if they're noticing. They just notice. What you are speaks so loud they can't hear what you say. They're looking at your walk. They're listening to your talk. They're judging by your actions every day because what you are speaks so loud. So, you know, I come from a teacher's perspective here today. And I have no idea how many students I've taught over the years. But I do know I have former students who are missionaries out in the Pacific, on the Pacific Islands. I have students that are preachers. Whether they remember the things that I taught them, I'm part of them. I tell my students, you know, wherever you go, whatever you do, you'll have a piece of me in you. So I'm interested in what's going on. But I influence. I influence when I check out at the grocery store. I influence when I meet that homeless person. So our time, I can see I'm not sure, they didn't tell me what time, so I know sort of. So I'm going to tell you one more story. Got permission to tell this. But I called Beth this past week, and I asked her permission to tell this story to you, and I want to end here. If you go to Spring Grove Cemetery and find my brother's grave and look at the stone on it, that stone will say, he'll remind you of Jesus. And this story comes through several. The pastor's wife told Beth, and Beth told me, and so some of it the details may not be exactly right. But if you knew Steve at all, you know that everybody is his friend. You know, he just talked to everybody. But he went to this church for a meeting, and he left his razors at home. So he decided to go to the store and get him some razors, and he checked out at Walmart, and he went out the door, and he met a homeless couple outside. And he stopped to talk to them. Ended up taking them inside to the McDonald's and sitting down and buying them something to eat and talking to them. And then when he had to leave because he had a service, he walked out and left his bag laying there. And when the couple left, they just took it up to the counter and gave it to the counter and they didn't know his name. And she was kind of aghast because how am I going to know him? Well, the next morning when he got ready to shave, he had no razors again. So he was like, I'll go get some more. No, I think I'll just go back there and just see if someone picked it up and gave it to him. So he walked into the McDonald's, and when he approached the table, the checkout table, the woman looked up and saw him and reached under and pulled that bag out and gave it to him. He said, how did you know that I was the one that left it here? She said, when those people left here yesterday, they gave it to me, and I said, how am I going to know? How am I going to know who this person is? And they said, oh, you'll know. He'll remind you of Jesus. So when I looked up and saw you, I knew you were the one. Influence. Lord, help me to walk out of church where I worship you and walk into the world and influence them for Jesus.